Okay, everyone, we're going to start shortly with April Chandler. We're going to talk about the surveillance state. And let me just do one thing here. Okay, we'll start shortly. We're going to start live on all mediums shortly. Let me see here. Just have to do one thing here. Okay. All right, I'm going to start. All right, hello everyone. So we have people coming in from Hawaii, Florida. We have people coming in also from Missouri, Vancouver, Australia, New York. Jen's putting all the different states up: Spain, Hawaii, Texas, California. Anyway, as people are joining, we have a special guest. April Chandler is going to interview me, and we're going to have a discourse on the surveillance state and really talk about technology and its influence on someone from Singapore, Ireland, Hungary, Naples, Florida. And we're going to really have a conversation about technology and what it means. In the book Climate of Science, I talk about this, where there's two ways technology can go. It can lead to a golden age, or it can lead to a dark age. And it really depends on who's in control of that technology. And I think the conversation about, first of all, understanding the purpose of a lot of these technologies and the underlying principles of how they operate will be very valuable. So I thought what I would do to begin is I have one of my books I wrote a couple of years ago, which won one of the Small Business Book Awards, is called The Future of Email, which discusses a history of the invention of email, which I did when I was a 14-year-old kid. But then it also talks about where email is at today and more digital technology. So I'll read you some of that, and that'll set the framework for the discussion April and I are going to have on the surveillance state. And then April also has some very deep insights to talk about what's happening, how this surveillance technology can actually be used to harm people, particularly our young people, our kids. So we're going to talk about that. But before I start, I typically like to share with everyone the fact that I am running for US Senate. Some of you may know that there is a Senate election taking place in Massachusetts. And that election in Massachusetts is an interesting one because typically people like myself are not supposed to run for US Senate, which means people actually create stuff, engineers, entrepreneurs, but that is in fact what's taking place. By way of introduction, I'm an MIT PhD in biological engineering. I'm an inventor and a scientist, and I'm running for Senate. I'm running as a Republican, but that does not mean, just to be clear, that I support the Republican establishment. I do support the values of what republicanism meant, which was essentially government should stay out of our way. It was supporting entrepreneurs, innovation, people taking responsibility for their lives, meritocracy. But that's not really what the Republican establishment is about. They actually work together with the Democratic establishment. So if you go to the website SHIVA for Senate, people can participate in many ways. Those of you who are out of the country or out of the state, we have people volunteering. Out of the state, you can volunteer. You can go right up to the volunteer section right here, and you can really support the campaign. You can join the campaign if you're other parts of Massachusetts or the country. We're giving away lawn signs and bumper stickers. Those of you in other parts of the United States, you can order them. We have people from all over the country putting up our lawn signs, but these are all the places you can get our lawn signs. Tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m., I'll actually be in Fitchburg with the bus where people can pick up, they can meet me and talk to me. But the other piece of it is, one of the key things that I want to educate people on is the interconnections of systems. So if you notice, a campaign goal here is truth, freedom, and health. And the essence is, without freedom, without the ability for us to move freely, have open discourse, we can't really practice science to get to truth. And without truth, we're always going to create fake problems and fake solutions, and then we'll never get to health. And without health, we're not going to be strong enough to fight for freedom. This notion of understanding the linkages between things is called systems thinking. So when people support the campaign, they actually get access to this awesome book called System and Revolution, which I just read a chapter of in the previous session. But System and Revolution, it's literally 40 years of my knowledge about engineering systems and what systems are, but made accessible to everyone. You don't need to go to MIT. You don't need to have a math degree. But in this small book, you can understand what a system is and what is revolution. And then you can use those concepts with a tool that I created called Your Body, Your System. And those of you out of the country, you can't donate to the campaign, but you can literally go directly to Your Body, Your System, and you can go to Get Started Now and you can get it there. But Your Body, Your System is an awesome tool, which is a health enlightening tool where you can use the tool to really understand what kind of system you are, which is a red dot, which is using systems theory. And then you can use the tool to figure out where you are today, which means if you haven't gotten enough sleep, if you aren't eating properly, that's the black dot, and how foods and inputs and everything can bring the black dot back to the red dot. It's a really cool tool. You can use it to support your health, but that's not what it's about. It's an educational tool to really learn about how systems work. So I encourage everyone to do that because in my view, unless we understand how systems work, people are always going to be confused, always going to be taken advantage of by those in power. That's what our campaign is fundamentally about. So everyone take advantage of that. And by the way, if you can't donate $25, donate whatever you can. And if you're really in dire straits, if you go here, we actually have a capability where we recognize, if you notice right here, it says we recognize people have economic distress. So do whatever you can, okay? But this is really meant to educate you. And that's what makes our campaign for US Senate quite unique. It's really a campaign for truth, freedom, and health, bottoms up. So let me bring April in. April, you there? Let me unmute you. Hi, April. April, you've been traveling and living out of hotels, right? So, yeah.
Yes. For the last couple of months, I'm in actually one of their business suites right now. It's 2 months. Yeah, probably another 2 months, I think, before they open the boardroom, we can actually come back in.
So April, maybe you can just take a couple of minutes and let people know a little bit about yourself, how you found out what I'm doing and what got you interested. But take a few minutes just to share with people your background.
Sure. Obviously, my name is April Chandler. I'm a documentary filmmaker focusing on children growing up in the care system and human trafficking. I think it's a subject that people just don't realize that it's very close to them. They assume it happens somewhere different to where they live, but it actually is everywhere. So for me, focusing on documentaries that were specifically about this topic has really taken over my life for the last few years. When I'm not doing that, I'm actually producing feature films, and I'm also an author of 6 books, including Wonder Life for Kids, which again, I did because I wanted children to become more empowered for themselves and, learn about suicide, learn about trafficking, learn about abuse, not try and tiptoe around the subject, but actually teach them how to have preventative training. So rather than healing them after these things happen. So that's really me in a nutshell.
Great. So I think one of the things we'll do is I wanted to take, before we got into our discussion, which sort of to set the framework as someone who does build technology every day. In this book, The Future of Email, I wrote it literally when the Hillary Clinton server issue was going on. The New York Times interviewed me to ask me my position. I said, well, clearly, I said she should be in jail because she had put the server in her basement so she could have her private email server. And one of the things the book brings out is that we're entering a world of the haves and have-nots. And I don't mean money. What I'm talking about, the haves who will have their own private servers. They'll be able to protect their data. And the have-nots, all of us who will be using free email where we give away our freedom, free services like Facebook where we give away our freedom. And the real future is going to be about censorship. and this was written about 3-4 years ago. Interesting enough, one of the cool small business awards. But what I thought I'd read here is one section in the first part of it. Says, "Wake up" is the introduction to the book. So I'll just read a couple paragraphs. It says, "The more it happens, the more the more it changes, the more it stays the same." I say this phrase first appeared in a French literary journal in 1849. The phrase is worth thinking about in the context of our present day environment, when we tend to focus on the enormous changes and innovations that have taken place in the past few decades, especially in the role of technology in our everyday lives. I would be the last one to deny those awesome changes, and this book intends to look closely at exactly how they work and what they will mean. But let's look first at a few things that have not changed, at least since human beings stopped hunting woolly mammoths with sticks and stones and societies started to organize themselves. The ancient Greeks and Romans, the Aztecs of pre-Columbian Mexico, the Mongols of Central Asia, the European monarchs of the Middle Ages, wherever you look in human history, societies have been organized into elites and everybody else. The elites have always ruled, and they're still ruling. Qualification for membership in an elite have changed and varied over the centuries. It was not always gender-based. Early on, matriarchies were common. Later, military prowess skewed rulership towards males. Priesthoods also developed. Supposed connections with gods and goddesses conferred major rights here on earth. The United States, technically speaking, is a representative democracy, quote, "one nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all," end quote. That's a beautiful foundation for a country, or at least an aspiration. But really, the US is ruled by its own version of elites and oligarchs, and the oligarchs rule. As that French maxim suggests, the details have changed, but the basic system remains intact. I've chosen the word quote unquote system very deliberately. I'm a system scientist with 4 degrees from MIT. I've studied systems theory at the intersection of technology, medicine, and artificial intelligence for many years. I've learned that all systems, including political ones, depend on 2 essential properties, and this will give sort of the theoretical basis. The first property is observability. The capacity to watch the operation of a system in detail, to recognize its trajectory, which means how it's moving, where it's going, and ideally to measure the input and output of the system at any point in time. The second property is predictability, the ability to regulate the inputs of a system in order to obtain an expected and desired output. For any system, therefore, whether it's a machine or garden or a whole society, observability and predictability are the basis of control. Whoever wishes to control a system must know or observe exactly what the current inputs and outputs of the system are, and must then have the ability to manipulate the system's inputs to generate predictable outputs. By itself, none of this is inherently good or bad. In a system of your own life, for example, observability and predictability are thoroughly positive when used for setting goals that can advance you creatively, emotionally, intellectually, and even financially. Technology can be hugely beneficial towards achieving those goals. Technology can be a powerful tool for enabling each of us to connect with and express our innate and unique gifts as individual human beings. But technology can also take us in a negative and destructive direction, especially when it's controlled not by ourselves, but by a distant, manipulative elite. So that's what the book starts out with. It's a book that really brings people up to date on what's going on with technology at a very fundamental level. So I know earlier, April, you and I were talking about very briefly about how as the elites consolidate technology, particularly, for example, the US elites and the Chinese Communist Party work very closely together. China, for example, has 200 million cameras.
Right.
And cameras can read, they don't even need to hear. They can read, your mouth motions, and they can convert that to language and what you're saying. And then they have a social score in China. And in the United States, that's already happened. We don't talk a lot about it. A lot of that technology was developed here and exported to China. But what we're building is a surveillance state. And we're told, by the way, this is always sold to us as though this is something for our own good, right? Safety, right? This is for your safety, watching you. But ultimately, the amount so by the way, the Democrats are the ones, the way I look at the left, Democrats typically promote the safety argument, be it vaccine safety, people like Bobby Kennedy do this. He talks a good game, but he's actually for safety. Okay, he wants to actually regulate it in the government. Trucker safety, bank safety, right? That we got to protect people from the big banks. We got to protect the meatpacking industry from hurting you. Or we got to. So all the Democrat left typically talks about safety, but ultimately what they want to do is regulate, and it in fact helps generate even more power and creates much bigger monopolies, which what the left Republic or the right Republicans like, the establishment. So both the Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment, one preaches safety and the other creates monopolies, and that's what's actually going on. But
yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that happens when any government wants to change anything is they first have to get buy-in, and the way to get buy-in is to create fear. And so once everyone's freaking out and scared, then it's easy to move into phase 2 of what they actually want to do, what their agenda is, to change the system so that they have more control over the people. Now, I think based on what you said earlier in terms of, as you say, the elites, for me, it comes down to classism. I don't want any harm to happen to the royal family, but we just don't need them. We should have evolved way past this notion of that we are the peasants and we have other people that are above us, ordained by God, and they control us. But we haven't, and we still hold on to, we're being brainwashed on a daily basis by this. And I think until we get rid of the class system, then we won't be equals. And while we're not equal, we'll always be in slavery. I know that some people think, well, we can't be slaves because we're not doing what people tell us to do, but we are. Because we get up, we go and do work. They need us because we're the ones that keep the wheels turning. And if we don't do what we're supposed to do, they can't live the life that they want.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think one of the things people are trying to wrap themselves around, there's a lot of confusion of what just took place. In March, I think early March, I did a tweet which said, as an MIT PhD in biological engineering, this will go down as one of the biggest fear-mongering hoaxes intended to basically, destroy an economy, suppress dissent, and do mandated medicine. And so, if you really look at it, from a systems perspective, fear is brought in, and then the fear leads to a way to manipulate people, saying, okay, we're going to protect you now, right? We want to make you safe. Wear masks, right? Do this, lockdown, stay away. This is the regulatory model. And that regulatory model, if you really look what it did, was it actually destroyed many small businesses. 50% of the restaurants are not going to open. But it consolidated power among the big. Dunkin' Donuts was open, McDonald's was open, Home Depot was open, Starbucks was open.
Yeah, all the massive chains, the ones that control.
Yeah, so those guys did quite well. And then massive amounts of money got transferred to Wall Street. And then they threw some bones to the super poor. But at the end of the day, the independent small business owner is the one who's getting decimated in this. And as a part of that, they use that fear to now impose more restrictions, to do more monitoring, to reduce freedom. So truth is violated, freedom is violated, and ultimately health will be violated.
Well, you know yourself, Maslow's hierarchy system, that when people are in that phase of comfort, they have their needs met, then they're able to move themselves into the next phase of their lives. And I think actually for some time, people have been getting into that phase. And once they're in that comfortable phase, they have the house, they have food, they don't have to worry. Then they're in a place of, security that they can actually focus on, hang on, I'm not happy about the system. I'm not happy about how the governments are running things. I don't want to be forced to do this or this and this. So when too many people talk back, then the best way to actually get control again is to make people go back into the bottom where they're actually worried about the safety of their roof over their head, worried about eating. And that's how they then get control, because people are so vulnerable in those times that they genuinely believe that when they come forward with, yes, we're here to give you comfort, we're here to protect you, that actually people believe it, when it's just really a ploy to get them back into the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a systems perspective, one of the things that I put in when I wrote System and Revolution, I was in Paris when I wrote it. There was where the Paris Commune took place, and in the book, if you want to get a System and Revolution, what I said was, we have bread but no health, we have land but no freedom, we have quote unquote peace but no truth. For truth, freedom, and health, we need to understand revolution, and to make revolution, you need a practical understanding of the principles of all systems. So when I wrote this book, it was really to educate people in a very small way what are system dynamics and what's happened. So one of the things that I feel the only way out of this is people need to be educated on how the principles of how systems work, April. Without an understanding of systems, we're going to go through another generation of suffering, then people head into more oppression, and then another generation of suffering and more oppression. There used to be a theory that the more you oppress people, that people will rise up and change the world. It actually is not true. Oppression leads to more oppression. People get more depressed. They feel like they can't do anything. So
yeah,
I am.
That's why the EU, the European Union. That's why I feel that the UK decided to vote out of that system, because they realized that they were getting suppressed. And they were fighting hard. A lot of Brits were fighting hard to get out of that system. But you can see for yourself that when you fight hard, you have like massive pushback from other people, because they genuinely believe in that they're there to protect us. But if you look at actually just the United Kingdom as an example, it can't fend for itself. Being within the European Union, they've stopped all farmers, from actually growing crops. They have now built on the land, so they've become now reliant on imports. And because of that, they couldn't even feed, the British can't feed themselves. And so now they're reliant on the EU. It's a clever system if you think about it. And that's how they control the people.
Yeah, and I think there's a way out of it, though. I think that's why when we, I'm running for Senate, but it's not just a Senate campaign, it's really an educational campaign. If people can understand the intersection of freedom and truth and health, and freedom and truth and health, each individual, and by the way, you don't need a lot of people. My numbers, you need about maximum 15% to get this in a population, because the other 55% are they don't know what to do, and there's about 25 to 30% of the people who control it on a good day, right?
Right.
So this isn't a hard problem to solve, but people need to be educated with actual tools. And those tools are systems thinking. If people need to be able to say, that's connected to that, to that, to that. And if people can find those interconnections based on a scientific way, then they can feel confident to stand up on their own 2 feet and articulate these things. Because the truth emerges when you connect the dots. So for example, if you take something like the Paris Accords, right? The elites, and a lot of the elites who are the liberal elites in Hollywood and celebrities, they went and told people the Paris Accords was a great thing for them. The Paris Accords, if you actually read it, so if you go to the reality and you take a real systems perspective, first of all, you find out that it incentivizes China to increase pollution. So 2 years ago, China had about 11 billion metric tons of carbon they put out. According to the Paris Accords, they can double their pollution to 22 billion metric tons. No one even reads this. So so it increases pollution, but the propaganda is that the fear is that the world is going to blow up and we need to reduce carbon, CO2. Meanwhile, China is incentivized to double its pollution up until 2030, and after that, they will have to buy carbon credits. And the value of those carbon credits on the stock market will skyrocket, and a few people will become trillionaires. So when you take a perspective, the truth emerges out of that. So my view, April, is we need to teach people how to think. And if they don't know how to think, I mean, if you saw with the COVID crisis, go look at Tucker Carlson. He's like, oh yeah, this is a big pandemic, and people need to take this seriously. And then he started literally recognizing what he was saying was nonsense, and now he's going in a different route. So that the mainstream media people just watch which way the views are going right now. If someone like me starts getting a lot of views, they literally plagiarize stuff and they use it, because there's nothing about telling the truth anymore. It's more about where they're going to make money out of it.
Right. It's about, as you say, views and popularity. One thing I would say about celebrities getting involved in campaigns, I genuinely think a lot of the celebrities that do get involved really care and they want to do something. And I work with a lot, so I know that on the surface, they're genuinely trying to help people. But I think the problem is that they're not what I would say, if you look at insights modeling, for example, you have your reds, your yellows, your blues, your greens. They're more they're not blues, which tend to be your accountants, those that are looking at the details, that actually go through the whole agreement and look at the information. They're just getting told the brief summary of what it means and how it can help people, and then they jump on that because they think it actually means something. So
what do you mean the blues? I didn't catch that.
Well, insights models, you have like 4 colors. You have your blues, your greens, your yellows, and your reds, and every person is basically those colors, but it's which ones dominate more than others. So you have people, for example, that are reds. They're your sort of directors, CEOs, that very much, they don't want to read anything. They just want to sign it. You have your blues, which are like your accountants, your lawyers, that are very much about the detail, really spending time going through every single agreement. And then you have the greens, who are more caring. They're like your front line.
You're talking about the characterization of these people by these, okay.
Yeah, so that's really what it comes down to. So I think what happens is that these organizations, they jump on the fact that the celebrities are creatives. They're going to be your yellows in personality. They're not interested in spending weeks and weeks going through, document this thick to read it. They get a summary. And then the problem is that because they buy into the summary, they then start to regurgitate that to their audiences. And the problem with that is that people actually then believe it. And because they're celebrities, people will start to follow what they do. And that's why we don't change. I think also in terms of humanity, as you mentioned earlier about the cycle carries on. While we have a class system, while we have the government set up the way they are, we can't be different to what we are now. We're going to become more suppressed because all we do is serve the 1% of the population that actually do make money. I mean, which companies are making money during the pandemic? There's only a handful. Amazon. You look at Bill Gates and Microsoft. It's gone through the roof in terms of how much money they're making. Why is that? I'm not just pointing out on him, but just in general, if you look, there's probably only 10 massive companies that are really making substantial amounts of money right now. And we know that the governments and people that elite, the 1% of the population, as I call them, they make money from our suffering. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was some form of either civil war or war on the back of this COVID-19, because that then solidifies the future. They've got their long-term plan, and it involves us being the slaves.
Yeah, I think 2020 will be a major inflection point. In my view, there's about maybe 90 days to 120 days in this cycle, because come September and October, which I've shared before, there's going to be another resurgence of this here. Because the next cycle of the quote unquote flu will be here, and you're going to see the next cycle. The only way out of this, in my view, is that the people who actually produce stuff anymore, small business people, entrepreneurs, must organize together and basically rally around some fundamental principles. And I think those are truth, freedom, and health. And then actually issue some very specific demands, which means no shutdown can ever, I just tweeted this out. These are, we did a thing a couple of days ago. One demand is no business can be shut down by any government unless that sector agrees to it, right? Because if it's bottoms up. Another is you cannot in any way. It should be illegal to force people to wear masks. I mean, I did a whole, from a science basis,
Yeah.
masks actually serve no purpose. You cough at them and they come up. And the fundamental issue here is, if you take a room full of 1,000 people, let's say one person there is immunocompromised, just one person, okay? What we're saying is the other 999 people need to wear masks, get vaccinated, be locked down to protect that one person's health. The model should be that one person, we should figure out how to boost his immune system.
Absolutely.
But
yeah.
So this whole model is flipped. Instead of saying
in helping people to get healthy, right? So you know, that's why no one's talking about boosting immunity other than yourself and a couple of other people that are reading.
Bill Maher's producers called us up, and he literally lifted what I was doing, and they started talking about it because he must have seen it was getting good views. But you know, this is a very simple thing. There's been 80,000 papers written on vitamin D.
Right. Well, look at Norman Cousins, what he did, you know, the intravenous vitamin C and laughter as a way to cure disease. I mean, we have the ability to cure it ourselves, but that doesn't make anybody wealthy. And as you say, I think actually the masks do have one purpose, and that is actually to create more fear. So that actually is working for the 1% that want that to happen.
Yeah, so the only way out of this is people need to go local and get back into building local relationships and communities among themselves. There's no other way out of this but that. The entire model has always been to give our control away to others. And it's been injected into us. So when you talk about the celebrity culture, I think it's a little more insidious than that. You know, most of the celebrities, there's two people that end up in Hollywood, either really good actors, which is a very small subset. People who are actually trained actors. 90% of them want to be celebrities. And for every one person who becomes a celebrity, there's about 1,000 others who could have done it, but they didn't sleep with the right person or weren't at the right place. So those people who become celebrities are actually very insecure people.
Yeah, but I think humanity is very insecure.
No, but I think when you are wanting to get that much popularity, and it's a very different thing, and you knew that you got that job not because of any skill, because you weren't frankly that skilled, many of these people. You were just at the right, because many of them don't do the chops and really go and do theater or really get training. So it's something else. So what ends up happening in that world is these people get golden handcuffs, and they are basically front ends for an engine that basically they willingly get utilized by. So if you look at the model of China right now owns all the AMC theaters. Most of Hollywood is owned by China.
Yeah, most of funding comes from China, you know, for films, you know.
Yeah, so I think these people are more insidious than that. I don't think they're good people. I think they're willing agents, and they make a decision in their lives for money and to keep their fame, because many of them have one hit and then they lose their popularity, so they have to do something to maintain relevance. So in many ways, I think it's a little more insidious than that, because if they had real skills, like they were true actors, right, actually put the time in, some of them took some course somewhere, most of them, and sort of got founded. So that entire culture where is intended in many, many ways to manipulate large masses of people. And that's what I was sharing with the previous caller. In China, for example, you know who they have on their billboards? They have engineers, scientists, people who have skilled, an American, very famous engineer scientist went to China, very famous guy. No one knows about him here, but he said 5,000 people were sitting there waiting to get his autograph. Okay. So in this country, we don't value any of that.
No,
so,
we value the fame, but that's led by the people as well. I think that they just don't want to be like in a normal world. Like, life is boring, life isn't that great, life is hard. So let's try and boost their life and become something different. Hence, I mean, look at how much soccer players get paid. It's ridiculous amounts of money a week, £150,000, you know, $200,000 a week to play football for a club. I mean, it's astonishing, and it's not justified. So I mean, I have to say, I do tend to look at things more from the positive aspect. You know, I did a show touring the world for 2 years to show the best in humanity against the backdrop of natural wonders, because I do genuinely believe that it doesn't matter what country you go to. I've been to Bosnia, all of these different countries. People just want to live a good life. Mm-hmm. They do. But we create this negative aspiration. And I think if you actually spoke to any of the actors and said, okay, what did you really want to do? Like when you was younger, some would probably say veterinarian, you know, but it just didn't pay for them to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where principles come in. And I think everyday people have, you know, people actually, common sense people actually have skills. They will live by their principles. And among the celebrity crowd, there's, like, I know this reasonably well, there are people who have actual skills. They'll walk away from jobs because they actually have skills. Daniel Day-Lewis does probably one movie every 5 years, okay? Because he's actually a skilled actor.
Right.
Most people are not skilled. They didn't put the time in. So that's why they sell out, because they actually have no skills. And so they're very, very related to politicians. 60% of Congress is lawyer lobbyists. They have no skills. If you actually have real skills, you can always go back to the farm. You can always go back to your job. So you will take a principled stand. But when you basically have no skills, you basically prostitute yourself, be it a politician, be it an academic. In academia, this has occurred. In academics today are not the most skilled scientists. They know how to play the game. So you've seen a complete loss in all institutions of essentially the lack of skill, and what gets promoted is the people who play politics. And so, so I think the only way out of it is skilled people who actually, skilled workers, people actually work. It gets back to something very fundamental.
Well, it's about pride for yourself. I mean, personally, you know, I choose to do the projects I do because I'm actually really passionate about that project. I don't actually care about money. One of the things that, you know, I look at money in the same way. If I was having a conversation with a chimpanzee and they had bananas and I had cash, why would they want that cash? Because they can't wear it, they can't eat it. It actually serves zero purpose for them. Whereas the bananas are going to be very useful. And so for me, every time I do something, I don't look at how much money I'm going to get. I couldn't care less. I go for the projects and I do the things that I actually enjoy. But it's hard for people to feel like that because they don't feel comfortable in their own skin. And that's one thing I really feel that we have become a heal and cure society. And really what we need to be is a preventative. Like you said, educate people ahead of time. If we can educate people when they're younger to be actually happy with who they genuinely are, we wouldn't have these problems. We wouldn't have people shaking in their boots in fear right now, having anxiety, panic attacks, worrying about a virus. When, if you look at some countries, Sweden, they've just saying, we cannot get rid of this coronavirus. So we're just going to learn to live with it. We're going to manage it. Okay. We have to just get on with life, people. And that, whether it's this virus or another one that's going to hit us, we have to be, if we are taking care of ourselves, then we're never going to be in that place where we feel vulnerable enough to be taken advantage of.
Yeah, someone just tweeted to me or on Instagram said that California had more suicides in this period than it had coronavirus deaths.
Yeah, and the thing is, for me, I did a project on suicide in Europe.
Yeah.
In the UK, compared to every other country in Europe, teenage suicide in boys is the highest in any other place. And I think two things is that they eat a huge amount of junk.
For teenage suicides in boys? Is that what you said?
Yeah, in the UK, compared to any other country in Europe. And the US has a huge proportion of suicides. But I think that problem actually isn't getting any better. You know, they don't feel that there's any hope. What I call wonder, they hope. They don't feel like there is any hope. There's nothing to look forward to. So they just decide that that's not an option for them to stay living in this world the way it is. I think part of that is that they're completely injected up to the nines with however many vaccines they can be given, from a child all the way through until they get to a teenager. And then they get fed McDonald's and all the other rubbish that's there. In the UK specifically, they have bus tickets, and on the back you can get a meal from McDonald's for 99 pence. So like $1.10. And interestingly, all McDonald's, the way that they're situated in Europe, they're always in the poverty areas. That's their model. They don't go and put a McDonald's near to an area where it's very wealthy, because nobody will eat it. So what they do is they prey on the people that are living in not so nice circumstances. Same with drugs. That's the thing with trafficking. Traffickers don't take wealthy kids. They take the kids from poverty areas that people are not going to really notice or care about.
So let's focus the discussion on, let's see. So April, why don't we focus the discussion, because people are asking here on the surveillance state. So at a very immediate level, there are technologies being deployed, which we know are out there, right? Which we pretty much been around for a long time, by the way. When I came to MIT in 1981, the third floor of the computer science building at MIT was known as the CIA floor. The NSA, this is in the 80s. So most of this stuff has been going on for a long time. The NSA basically gathers lots and lots of data, petabytes worth of data. So this is, so I find it sort of interesting because people are alarmed now, but this has been going on for probably at least 50, 60 years. It just got
because of because of the web. I think people were more aware of it.
The computing has gotten faster, independent of the web. The technology has just gotten superior. You have, this device here now has more power than, probably 30 mainframes 30 years ago. The amount of how much you can pack into a transistor. The computing power of these devices and what you can put on a small chip has gotten exceedingly powerful. The cameras have gotten better. So there's massive, massive gains in technology that have taken place. So the ability to surveil people, you can always use it for good things too, has gotten enormously powerful. So the question comes in, who owns that data and where is that data residing? And I think maybe we were talking earlier about the data can be used. Theoretically, you could probably use this kind of data from the medical side to detect stuff a long time ago, detect which populations need immune boosting and which need help, these kinds of things. Or you can use it for essentially predicting behavior, and then utilizing that behavior. So if someone in a household behaves like this, this, and this, you can figure out what to sell them. The consumer packaged goods companies do this.
Yeah, they do that now. Basically everything that people, that's why sometimes when people think something and then all of a sudden they see an ad come up on Google and they're like, how did they know that? It's because they're predictable, because everything they're doing leads them to be sold those type of trainers, that type of.
If you turn on your voice on Siri, it's actually gathering all that data. So you could be having a conversation and it's gathering that data. So, but ultimately, I think this comes down to, let's talk maybe a couple minutes. You were saying that the child traffickers, I think about 800,000 kids per year in the United States are found missing.
Yeah, it's just over 1 million kids per year in North America.
Yeah. So what? So
and that doesn't count the Native Americans or the First Nation, because they're not actually added to those lists. So when people disappear that are Native Americans, no one actually adds them to it.
So you were saying that with this surveillance technology, people could also use that. Let's say a kid is going from their home to school and back, and you watch all this stuff, when the kid is in a potential area to nab the kid up, right? And this is
right. the thing is, what will happen is that parents will start to, oh, they're okay because we've got them under some form of surveillance. So we know exactly where they are. They'll give them a little bit more free reign to go to places by themselves because they're under now this protection. But then what happens is that, as we know, crime syndicates are very smart. They're very entrepreneurial. Drugs, guns, and trafficking, it's the biggest crimes worldwide, and human trafficking is the third highest. So you think selling a human being, which you can actually buy now for $90, is a big business. But it's big business when you have the numbers. And then, of course, then you have the secondary revenue from the trafficking because they are then sexually abused online and people watch them. So why would anyone think that these criminal lords are not going to become creative and use that technology? I mean, hackers have been hacking into every system since the day there was a system. So hackers are going to continue to do that, and they're going to get access to information about these children, about their gymnastics classes, about where they are. And that, I believe that the number of kids that be trafficked in North America will actually go from probably 1 million to probably 5 million within 2 years, because it's going to be easier, because they're going to know every single thing about the kids.
Where are these kids being sold to?
Different places.
You're saying you can buy a kid for $90? You
can buy a person for $90.
Like where are people selling these people? Are there actual markets?
From South America, from Romania, from the UK. It doesn't matter. What tends to happen is that they're more ethnic minority, because there's, if it was a white middle class or upper class family, they'd probably be causing such havoc to try and get their child back. Whereas if you have, thousands and millions of Hispanic kids or African Americans, who's going to really kick up a fuss?
Mm-hmm.
But this is actually the reality. Pakistan, India have the same situation. In some cases, what happens is that there's orphanages. People feel that, oh, these poor little children, they happen to be in an orphanage, and then they'll actually donate to the orphanage. But the orphanage is actually one of the sort of the front of the crime. So an example, a man will go into a village when a woman's pregnant in Africa, and they'll talk to the women and they'll say, you're living in poverty, you can't really afford to eat. But what we can do is we can give your child an education. We can give them a bright future. Okay, let's just take care of all your medical needs right now. You don't have to worry about it, but just sign here because we want to give you medical to make sure that your baby is born healthy. So the women obviously can't read and write that well. They sign the document, and then when the baby's born, the woman gets a bill for the medical care. She can't pay it, and the contract that she signed means that they can take her child. And people say, well, why would anyone do that? Well, what happens is they take the child to an orphanage, then they promote it all over the world, and everyone goes, oh, that poor little baby. I'm going to donate right now. I'm going to donate to that orphanage. But that money never goes to the child. It goes to the crime syndicate, who just keep doing the same things over. And then these kids are abused and trafficked as long as they're useful and they work and do the things that other people don't want to do. It's actually, it's something that we've been doing for centuries. We just don't seem to change. And now we're using technology to help.
So that kid that's taken from that orphanage, they grow up and then they're sold to what?
Well, they now are the property of the people in the orphanage. And then when they get to an age where they're no longer cute and they can't serve their purpose of actually raising any money for the orphanage, they're then sold to someone else that can be used either for sex or as a servant, online for abuse, sexual abuse, where you have thousands of people watching from around the world, paying to watch, while someone abuses a little boy or a little girl. I mean, it's a big business. It's the third largest business in the world, the crime.
Well, what's interesting is we did we had a bunch of women on in the United States, mothers, and we were talking about family separation, the Child Protective Services. So it turns out that's become a $1.2 trillion industry in the United States. This is in the United States. 50% more bigger than the defense industry. The defense budget in the United States is $750 billion. So the United States central government distributes to all the states about $1.2 trillion to quote unquote protect children. And by the way, that was brought to you by Hillary Clinton.
Which, when you actually look at the money spent, the outcome is actually, it's not positive. So I've gone through this conversation a few times about how, like, the UK system is that the children that end up in the institutional care system in the UK, it costs billions. Obviously, it's a smaller place to the US, but it costs billions of pounds each year. And then you look at the outcomes. Most of these kids end up young teenage pregnancies, juvenile detention, drugs, crime. And actually 48% of them end up in the prison system when they get of age. So they actually trade one institution for another. Whereas when you look at actually how much it costs for a child to go to an elite boarding school where they'll learn 2 languages, music, they'll get connections, great friendships, social skills, all the things that you need to actually survive and do well in this world, that would cost about £35,000 in the UK to go to one of the best. But yet for each child that goes through the care system, it's around 150,000 a year. It doesn't work. And that is actually the cost for them as a child. Forget all the other things associated.
Right, but it makes sense, right? So the elites send their kids for a lower cost, a better education. The rest of the people pay a much higher price because other people are making money. Turns out in the US, if you can call, let's say you hear someone fighting next door, someone can call the Child Protective Services. They come in, take away the kid up to a year, let's say. The foster care is getting paid almost allocated about $5,000 to $10,000 per child. Let's say 7K, so that's $70,000 per year. But only 10 to 20% of that goes to the foster families. Everyone in between is making money off that. The lawyers, judges.
Absolutely, it's massive business. And to me, it's another form of human slavery, human trafficking. It's just that it's somewhat legalized, and we don't know it's happening. If you have autism in hospitals in the US, or if like you're in not in hospitals, in institutional care, if you have no family, most of these autistic kids, when they become teenagers, are actually strapped to beds in hospitals because people don't know what to do with them. They're not given quality of life. They're strapped to a bed because they have autism.
Let's talk about, we have about 10 minutes. Let's talk about what's the solution, because I think in every one of these areas, I think people get it. And I think unless there's a solution, people are going to get very depressed. I see a lot of people writing stuff about how bad it is. I see a minuscule set of people writing how you solve this.
Right. Well, I personally petitioned the Parliament in the UK to end institutional care, because I think that's the issue. There are so many families around the world that actually want to adopt kids, but they make it so hard because they want to make sure that it's the right family. But then that wouldn't actually help their big 1.2 trillion business if they allowed these kids to go into these lovely families and be adopted. That, I feel, is the solution, is that we end institutional care worldwide. We don't have a system where these kids go into any form of fostering, children's homes, juvenile detention, that we actually coach them the way we would our own children that actually stay with us to live a good life. By ending institutional care, that actually gives us the opportunity for children to go straight into families. If we didn't have the governments as tight as they are, what would stop you meeting some nice kids and thinking, you know what, I'm going to give one of them a home. I'm going to take them under my wing and give them a good life. But you can't, because there's so many tight regulations. And yet most of the abuse that goes on in foster parents and children's homes is astounding. and they don't they think that they're regulating them, but actually they're just continuing the system. I feel that children deserve to be in loving family homes. And if you wouldn't put your own child into an institution, then we shouldn't allow other kids to be in an institution.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue is that I don't think those in power are going to do anything about this. I think you have to build a bottoms-up movement, April. I think going and appealing to them has never worked in any world. Nothing ever systemically changes. The only way out of this is to build bottoms-up movements.
Well, that's why I made the documentary film.
Yeah.
I went and into the US, and I filmed in 3 states, 3 cities: Los Angeles, New York, and Denver. The reason why I picked those 3 to show what institutional care is like and how these kids have been brought up is, and actually there's a lot of positive stuff. You'll see like how the kids are. Some are troubled, but some are really, they want a good life. They're keen to learn. They want to get a good education. They don't want to move around every 3 months. That starts to inhibit your ability to have a good education. And as you said, having that education is fundamental to change in our society. And the more we can educate people, the better. So with going into, I didn't want to just do East Coast in New York, and then people say, well, it only happens on the East Coast. That's why I did West Coast and Denver. I mean, you can't get much more suburban than Denver, and it still happens there. It's everywhere. I also feel that there's one thing that people don't realize is that with the homeless that are in LA, 30% of those are actually children living on the streets. I mean, when did our society become like this so that was acceptable, that children are left to live on the streets? I mean, America's supposed to be regarded as the richest country on the planet, but yet people are, children are sleeping on the streets. And we so-called call India and other places third world countries. Well, we would expect children to be living on the streets there. But what, Los Angeles? I mean, look how wealthy it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's the hypocritical elites. And I think that's why, in my view, people need to let go of these icons of these celebrities, these lawyer lobbyists, and the entire top-down model. And the sooner people do that and let go of the not-so-obvious establishment, it's not the establishment, it's the people who claim they want to help you. The nonprofit organizations, the liberal elites. These people in many ways are the deeper enemies of people than even the overt elites. It's easy to attack Bill Gates. It's easy to attack Fauci and all these people. It's harder to expose a guy like Bobby Kennedy. Okay? And that's why I did that. It's harder to expose the liberal elites like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, because these people talk a good game, and they're basically the poverty pimps. Mm-hmm. What they do is they build their little brands around their celebrity, around other things, and they are actually the people who enslave people. And I think that aspect of it is what common sense people get. And the sooner that happens, the sooner we're going to see alleviation of human suffering, because what you just mentioned with the orphanage and showing bloated babies in Africa, blah, 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 blah. And if you look at the character of those people, they're all typically the liberal elites because they want to wash their own guilt.
Yeah, it's socialism at its best.
It's socialism, but it's also, it's that, but it's also the aspect of people building their brand equities on the backs of other people. So you have the establishment, and then you have the not so obvious establishment. A guy like Bernie Sanders talks a lot of nonsense, but at the end of the day, he will give all of his votes to Hillary Clinton. You have people attacking Gates, but they won't attack Hillary Clinton. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's what's happening historically. People, you go again and again and again, and you will see that the real enemies of people are these Judases. And I think what needs to happen is, one of the things that we're educating people on is, you're not, because that not so obvious establishment is actively used to make sure no social change ever occurs. Like, you have to go beg to somebody. Let's go to the governor. Let's go beg to them. This is a wrong approach. You have to build a bottoms-up movement. Now, it takes a little more effort, but that's ultimately, in my view, what has always changed history. But the most important thing is for people to recognize the not so obvious establishment.
Well, if you look at what's happening in Australia as an example, they're trying to pass a new modern day slavery bill. And you think, well, why would they need that? But the reality is that the original Slavery Act has so many loopholes now because of technology and everything else that they actually keep getting off when it goes to court. So they have tried to pass a new modern day Slavery Act through the Parliament in Australia, and most of the Liberals won't support it. It's, and it absolutely is, because it maintains this cycle. So I agree, we can't rely on governments to actually do the work for us. We have to talk about it.
Yeah, it's the governments and the people, particularly if you look at the ones that claim they want to change things, when they actually serve to funnel the direction right back into the establishment hands. And typically the litmus test of that is, do they want more regulations? So if they want more government regulations, that should be a red flag for people. That what they really want to do is to make it easier for the establishment to give the appearance they're helping you, but they're actually doing more control. But that little subtle thing is what people need to understand. When I was in Washington, we were delivering the Fauci petitions, and there was this huge bunch of, I think about 500 truckers in front of the White House. They really had heard about what we were doing, and we had a big discussion late into the midnight. And it turns out in the United States, 15% of the trucking industry is controlled by a few major trucking companies. 15% of the goods are transported by a few major trucking companies. The interesting news is 85% of the stuff that gets moved in the world, all the stuff that we have in our homes, is done by small truckers. So what happened was the liberal elite said, oh my God, people are getting killed on the roads. Apparently only 30 people had gotten killed by the big trucking companies, because they basically take some young kid and say, look, we'll make you a truck driver, put them through their factory farm of trucking schools, get them. But those people were killing people. So what they did was they imposed a restriction or a surveillance, talking about the surveillance state, where every of those other 3 million truckers had to put a little device in their trucks, which would track how long that they were moving. And they said that they could only run their machine, which is their truck, for 14 hours. So before they had very, normal level of accidents. Once they put those machines in all those small business truckers, the level of accidents escalated 2 to 3 per day. Why? Because they were rushing from point A to point B because they had to do everything in a 14-hour cycle, because they're being tracked. Right now, the big trucking companies have 2 people driving trucks, so they have a little more flexibility. And on top of that, all this data is being extracted eventually, so they could have, AI trucks, automatic driven trucks.
Right.
But the liberal elite always said, oh yeah, we have to do this for the safety of somebody. Hillary Clinton did the Child Cares Act, whatever that was called, for the safety of the children. So whenever I hear the word safety, like now, it's really clear to me, it's typically some liberal elite. Vaccine safety, right? Child safety, driver safety. It always is about creating more of the surveillance state. And I think
right. Kids, yeah. If they really genuinely cared about the kids, why have, going back decades, have 1 million kids disappeared in North America every year? So they don't care that much about kids. If you look at road traffic accidents, it's a small amount compared to actually how many disappear. These are not statistics made up. These are, it's public records. It's police stations, where kids have disappeared. So they can't, to introduce all these care acts, yourself, it's purely because they think the audience actually will believe that. But we have to get people around the idea that actually, if we truly care, then we need to make changes for ourselves. And that, I personally, if I had to be in a city which had all that surveillance, I would go and live in the woods, in the mountains somewhere. I'm currently in British Columbia, and it's absolutely amazing. I'm up high in, the sea to sky. And there's no surveillance up here, or very minimal, maybe traffic camera or something like that. But I just wouldn't want to live and have my children live in a world where every single thing that they do is tracked. I would literally delete, and well, my Facebook profile was deleted because I made a comment, and they said I was sharing fake information, so they deleted me. And I just think that's what's going to happen if you express yourself, if you say something that's not actually following the script of what people want you to say, then you're going to be cut off. And that's what will happen across social media. We'll all be cut off from expressing ourselves unless we're following what we're told to say.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a police state.
The good news is there are solutions to this, and they're bottoms-up solutions. They're never going to come top-down. All right, April. So any final closing questions, comments?
I would just say that if anyone thinks that surveillance actually is there really to protect them, it really isn't. An example of this is people always assume that borders are there to keep people out, but they're also to keep people in. And we've had this example right now with COVID-19. That's why, to be honest, I would actually prefer to have, I know people say, well, I'm very much about utopia, have a one world type scenario, but actually, I think that really is probably the only solution to actually having freedom, where you can go wherever you want on this planet. You wouldn't, because borders, more surveillance is just going to create more poverty, more classism, and long-term suffering.
Yeah. Well, I think there are technology solutions. One of those solutions is bottoms up. There are ways that we can, ultimately what needs to happen is all needs to be peer-to-peer, and it needs to be, the network needs to be owned by people. The United States Postal Service was set up by the founders of this country to enable me to send you a communication, and no one should interfere with it. Now, when the digital medium came, they never kept up with it. But the founders of the US Constitution created the Postal Service to support that infrastructure. So my view is that there are some incredible solutions, which is what I wanted to, that's what we're running on. Citizen science, for example, the data of science should be owned by citizens. And these are things that can be implemented. These are not sort of fairy tale solutions anymore. The Digital Rights Act that we propose will allow, which basically will force the Postal Service to deliver, let's say, the equivalent of Facebook, YouTube, in an environment that's on a network that's owned by the people, for the people. And this already exists with the Postal Service. So if anyone interferes with that communication, is 20-year sentence in prison. And then finally, with healthcare and the Health Rights Act we propose, the 1962 Kennedy Vaccination Act should completely be taken away. They've tried it because it leads to mandated medicine. So in my view, there's three things that can actually be done that devolves power back to people: Digital Rights Act, Citizen Science Act, and the Health Rights Act. And these are things that literally support truth from the science side, because right now, maybe about 5 university presidents can own science, how it goes. And so when our taxpayer dollars fund an academic institution in this act, all of that data should go up to the cloud, and any one of us can analyze it.
Right.
The Digital Rights Act basically says use the Postal Service infrastructure to provide a network, which is already right now, it's there. If anyone interferes with the postal mail, it's 20 years in prison. But when you send email through, or messages through Facebook or Google, they own your email. So people have willingly, that's why I think people are whining a little bit here. When people sign up to Facebook and YouTube and Gmail, the privacy statement clearly says they own your email. What we need to do is to realize we're taking that stuff for free, and then we're whining that they're censoring us. You see what I'm saying? So there's a reality that's taking here, which basically
don't read the small print. That's a perfect example. Is that unless you're an accountant, unless you're one of those blues in the insights model, you're not going to read. They have such a long terms and conditions that who's going to actually read it? That's what they rely on.
even if you don't read it, there's a notion that something comes for free. Even if you didn't read their 100-page thing, the bottom line is that nothing in life is free. And so when we create an environment thinking, and we don't go bottoms up, we've been trained, I think, to think top down, that we have to go beg to people for crumbs. And all of these activist leaders, who I call the poverty pimps, on the left and the right, everything that they've done is to mislead people to go beg, to do stuff with legislatures. These guys are, we noticed in the vaccine movement, until we got involved for 15 years, people have been begging to legislators. We said, go on the ground, build a militant movement bottoms up. And that's why we won in New Jersey. So
when I renewed my visa for coming into the US, because of the time of the year, they wanted me to get a flu vaccine and also an MMR. Now that was going back, say, 8 years ago. And I'm like, the MMR? I'm in my late 30s, for goodness sake. Why would I need to get the MMR? But when I sort of pushed back, like I didn't want to do it, they said, well, that's okay. You can pay $800 and we'll submit it for review. And I said, well, how long would that take? And they said, oh, about 9 months. So I would have to wait 9 months before I would even get back into the US. And that's where, so I was like, oh, fine, I'll have to get the MMR, I'll have to get the flu jab. And so they push you into these corners in order to force you to do it, which I just think it's a violation to do that. But that's what they do for anyone that wants to come into the US.
Yeah, well, Alan Dershowitz just did a video saying that he justified that the United States government can vaccinate you. They can do anything they want to by the law. So that's why I'm convinced that we have to build a bottoms-up movement. And there's no short-circuiting around that. It has to be a bottoms-up movement, and it has to be built by people who actually have the most to lose. And the people who have the most to lose are the independent-minded people who are self-actualized, who are the entrepreneurs, who are the innovators, who are the small business people who take risks. And if they don't do that, in my view, there's about a 90 to 120 day window. This is not a long time frame. No. That the level of fascism is going to escalate much more.
Yeah, so. And if you're an entrepreneur and a free thinker, they're not going to want you around. And that is actually, that's dangerous then.
Yep.
You can't express yourself. So I really hope that, for me, I'm on my campaign. This is something I really believe in. I'm gonna, I still will be pushing people, don't follow what you're told, actually look into it, don't be influenced by the left or the right. Just think for yourself, what's best for you, what's best for your family. Yeah. And so I do think that the more people that take action, the better. I know it's not easy for people to to come to that decision when they're starving or they're worried about paying their rent or their mortgage, which is what this situation has created. But if they understand that that's been created in order to get them into this place, it's like a chess match. This is where they take control, and we have to, talk with our feet. And if we don't do that, things will end up getting much worse than what they are right now.
All right. Thanks, April. It's good to speak with you. Let's stay in touch. Let me see if there's anything on Instagram here. All right. Great. Thanks. Thanks, April. Be well. Let's stay in touch. Thank you. And I wish you the best up in British Columbia.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. I think that was pretty good. We talked about the surveillance state. Again, in closing, what I want to say is tomorrow I'll be in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, which is in central Mass. It's a great, Leominster, Massachusetts, Leomini. Jen, maybe you can put that up in Leominster, Massachusetts. And I'll be with our bus, and we're starting our ground campaign all across Massachusetts. And nearly every day I'll be somewhere in Massachusetts. We have lawn signs, bumper stickers. People want to join us, please do so. Once again, if I share with everyone the website let me add this here. If people go to the website and want to learn more about the campaign, it'll be up there in the events section, but people can volunteer for the campaign, which is right here. If you want to support the campaign, if you're in Massachusetts, you can just click here, pledge to vote for us. And part of the pledge that we're doing right now in Massachusetts is we want people to pledge, and from a truth, freedom, and health standpoint, to really, if you want to support the campaign, that's one thing. If you want to donate to the campaign, you get the book and you get access to the tool, Your Body, Your System. But another way that we're also putting together, and everyone should be aware of, is a couple of last week we actually put forward to people what is it they would like to see, from a perspective on the things that we should stand for. And there's 5 demands that came out of that. One is that people should pledge that if you're in any business, you should never allow your business to be shut down by the government unless 60, 70% of your other people in the sector. So if you're in the nail salon sector, the government shouldn't be able to just shut it down unless 60 to 70% of the other nail salon owners believe in it. Number 2, if you have a senior citizen is in a nursing home, no one should be denying them the ability to have someone come see them. If you're a parent and you have a child and you're sending it to a school and the school's starting to do wacky things, social distancing, having your child wear a mask, and you want to pull that kid out, you should have the right to be able to get the same amount, the dollar per pupil that the government spends, back to you so you could use it for homeschooling. And so these are the kinds of things that I think we should start demanding. It can't just be sort of sitting back and watching all this take place. So anyway, this is Dr. Shiva. We need to start building a bottoms-up movement for truth, freedom, and health. We cannot rely on legislators, the lawyer lobbyists. It needs to come bottoms up. So keep an eye out for us. If you guys want to, if you're in Massachusetts or you have friends in Massachusetts and you want me to go to different places, I will be taking our bus and traveling. So please let us know. Thank you very much. Be the light. Be well. Thank you.